David, welcome to our new consolidated format show. You and I have moved from a twice weekly format to once a week, where we're going to present first our preview show here to our viewers on YouTube and Periscope and Facebook. I've just reactivated DLive. There was a little technical problem with DLive. We're also on VK.com and of course Patreon and Subscribestar. We want to definitely thank our generous sponsors on Patreon. How are you today, David?
I'm very well, Jason, thank you.
It's good to see you as always. And you know, what we're going to do, as usual, is we will have the first portion of our interview right here for everyone to enjoy. And then after that, we're going to transition in just 1 hour from now over to patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth, and also subscribestar.com/crowdsource the truth. It's so important, David, that our viewers become sponsors, because so much of what we're talking about are the types of things that advertisers will not place ads on, that YouTube will scrub and remove and eliminate the channel. And so if people enjoy our show and they're watching each week, and I know there are thousands who do, they really have to get on to patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth to become sponsors and help us keep the show going. We've got some interesting topics to discuss this week, David. I don't know if we want to talk about what's going on with the Washington Post and our friend Christine Marcy and all of the social engineers that love to talk about our show and watch our show. They're not sponsors, but they are encouraging others to not be sponsors. What do you think? Should we get into that at all, or just carry on with our...
Each one of these interesting leads is a show in itself, if you will, Jason, but I'd like to touch on the point. I believe, I infer that we have a very bright group of patrons and supporters and listeners, and I think we should solicit their help, not just for the money, because that's obviously very important, but we're up against a community of what I might describe as AI wizards. And if we look at the collage, we've got a whole grouping of AI wizards down on the bottom left in that tunnel, with some rather interesting characters there that we will come to. But it's my belief now that these people, through this British company SERCO, they've captured control of the United States Patent Office. In fact, SERCO processed the 4 millionth patent for the United States Patent and Trademark Office on the 17th, by the 17th of November of last year. And amongst those patented devices are a whole host of devices that I believe deal with social engineering and the elimination of narratives or theories or logic which conflict with whatever these people want to promote. You know, classic example is this guy, Osama bin Laden, who's shown in a very nice white robe on the bottom left-hand side, besides the Amalgam Virgo war game of the 1st and 2nd of June of 2001, which has him as effectively, I guess, well, he's dressed in white. I suppose you could call him the white team leader. But in these war games, you have red teams and blue teams, and the red team is trying to take out the blue team and get within 3 minutes of target. And the blue team's job is to stop the red team getting within 3 minutes of target. And a war game like that ends when the war game maestro, who I have reason to believe was a man by the name of Timothy Garden, a Brit, when he says knock it off, the red team and the blue team go home, right? But of course, at that particular moment, both sides stand down. Now, so the blue team stood down on 911, but the red team stood up because a group of wizards, including that marvelous rendition of a man called David G. Swigert, with his full-length apparatus and a little patsy bag showing Entrust, and we can come to that. But remember, as an ethical hacker, he has, amongst other things, he's an Air Force veteran. He had a couple of contracts with the NSA, National Security Agency. He worked on classified networks for Booz Allen and Hamilton. And he worked on implementing time stamping for financial transactions for a company called Eurosign in Luxembourg, where he coupled them up to an outfit called DigiStamp in Chicago, such that any transaction could be timestamped, so there'd be no arguments about who sold first and when. So this guy, I would say he's uniquely qualified to act as the red team leader, notwithstanding the role, as shown in that war game exercise, was assigned to Osama bin Laden, right? And then you have various people around him. But if you could scroll up and just show that rather menacing looking building, well, I kind of think it's rather menacing. That's an outfit called Hawkhills Manor in the United Kingdom, where it's operated by this British company, SERCO. And that's quite amazing when you think that SERCO operates the United States Patent and Trademark Office and the National Visa Center and 60 FAA contract towers and the Defense Red Switch Network and so on and so on and so on. So at Hawkhills, what SERCO will do for a client, such as the Ministry of Defense or the UK Cabinet Office, it will stage a emergency incident on the client's network. So what these clowns do, they borrow the client's network, so the United Kingdom government, for that matter, the American government or the New York City or state governments, they lend their communications network to this company, SERCO, which then injects news and media
Fake
plays
news.
into, well, it may be fake or it may be real. The point is, it's a non-real event, right? Where the idea is that SERCO will then, through professional television journalists or maybe interviewers like you, will coach and train the government officials to communicate with the public in a way that doesn't panic the public. The problem, of course, is maybe the public does need panicking, like on 911, because the public was sent to sleep. So what's very interesting is the possibility, and this is going back to World War II, that down below Hawkhills, there is a command and control room with fiber optic links direct into what I would call dirty cities or dirty fibers before the crime occurs. That is to say that SERCO can deploy, let's say, members of the city and guilds livery companies who are specialists in a whole range of things into an area such as New York City on 911 to carry out their particular functions. Well, one particular function of a city and guild is that of the worshipful company of newspaper makers and stationers. And these people, of course, can inject fake news into the media or prep the public before the crime occurs, so the public has an expectation of something where the idea was originally planted, let's say, a couple of months before. So that war game that we were looking at, the Amalgam Virgo war game, took place on the 1st and 2nd of June of 2001. And it was an exercise staged by the Canadian arm of NORAD and the United States arm of NORAD, where there was a hijacking of a 727 over Alaska. The plane was then flown south over Abbotsford, south into the United States across the border, turned east, and in the exercise took out the Capitol building. Well, isn't that amazing, Jason, since the fourth plane was headed for the Capitol building on 911 when someone, and I'm suggesting it was David Swigert, switched the war game from simulation to live fire. Now, Mr. Swigert, I'm not accusing Mr. Swigert of doing it. I am saying that Mr. Swigert is perhaps not quite as smart as he thinks. And when he's acting as an ethical hacker, he could open the door into a network of patented devices that would allow people much smarter than him in through the back door, let's say working with the worshipful company of information technologists, and they can actually execute an attack in New York where there's an insurance policy taken out against both towers coming down on the same day in what's known as a catastrophe bond fraud. If both towers do come down on the same day, the sponsor of the catastrophe bond makes out in spades, and the investors could lose up to $6 billion. Over to you.
Well, you know, David, the other thing that I find quite strange about it, and we need to be clear, we're not suggesting that David Swigert actively pushed the button, but this is a guy who was running boot camps for ethical hackers. How do we know that one of his students or one of his apprentices apprentices did not go rogue and take his information and enable this, or as you've suggested, perhaps his effort to hack something in an ethical capacity itself may have gone rogue, and someone else unknown to David Swigert may have piggybacked, may have exploited, may have somehow utilized his hack to do as you say. The other thing I find tremendously interesting about this is that there's somebody else that we talk about for which the Capitol building was a target, and of course we're talking about the evil teachers Bernardine Dorn and Bill Ayers of the Weather Underground, closely associated with Barack and Michelle Obama. We know that David Swigert's brother George has publicly stated that he will always protect Barack Obama. We know that Manuel Chavez, who has worked quite closely with David Swigert, was a volunteer for the Obama for America campaign, whatever that was. So these are all guys that are associated with Obama. Obama is associated with the still active Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dorn. You and I have discussed how it is your theory that the Weather Underground remains active. So could these things be extensions of the Weather Underground?
Oh, totally. And the Weather Underground is an extension of techniques developed by British intelligence, not just in World War II, but going back to World War I, and maybe the early days of the city and guilds livery companies of London, where some of those livery companies date back to the first millennium, it is
David,
believed.
tell us again what these city and guild livery companies are. I think most Americans are not familiar with that, and it's something that's come up pretty recently in our conversations.
Yes. Now, I believe you told me that you were a member, or there was a guild of something in Hollywood.
Cinematographers,
which you were
yes.
a member, or?
Yep. I was essentially forced to join the local 600 Cinematographers Guild at great expense.
Okay, so guild is a very old word. And in the case of the livery companies of the City of London, if you had a group of people practicing a given profession or trade, and quite frequently this would be in the vicinity of London and the Square Mile, the old city walls, the Roman city walls, you could be granted from the Crown letters patent, so that you would be the exclusive patentee or practitioner of a given trade or a profession, whether it's candlestick makers or bowyers or fletchers. Fletchers would make arrows, for example, worship of a company of security professionals. And from the point of view of 911, unfortunately for the United States, because my theory is developing that the City of London has been subverted, if you will, with dirty fiber, dirty optical fiber networks, and I'll come to that in a minute. But the City of London, which is the capital of world trade, one of the livery companies is the Worshipful Company of World Traders. Now, when the Crown grants livery company status to a guild, it has to go through certain motions. It grants an exclusive right to practice whatever the guild has been set up to do, whether it's bowyers or fletchers. And there's a word which I think your listeners or our listeners might find very interesting, which is the word interloper. Mm-hmm. That is to say, with these guilds and livery companies, ultimately with the growth of the British Empire, I believe they were given not necessarily the written, but the unwritten right to enforce their monopoly around the world. Well, the Worshipful Company of World Traders would look at what was going on in the World Trade Center in New York and say, this has to go. So it went on 911. Now, this, of course, might be kind of astonishing, but when you think around or nearly 3,000 people, many of them experts in their particular profession, like Aon Corporation, I think lost 197 people, and these were expert in the insurance and reinsurance business. Well, the headquarters of Aon was in Chicago on 9/11, and I think you and I have been, maybe we can surprise a few Americans. I think Aon was told to move its headquarters to London to join or be more closely affiliated with the Worshipful Company of Insurers, which shares its hall with the Worshipful Company of Firefighters. So I think we are finding motive and opportunity and weapon related to what could be significantly more than a 500-year approach to monopolizing world trade out of the square mile of the City of London. And of course, the walls in the square mile are Roman walls.
Right.
Now, when the Roman Empire collapsed, the only, dare I say it, civilized place where you could study Greek and Latin and learn about astrology and history and all that sort of thing was really England or the United Kingdom. And I went to school in Canterbury up on the hill at a place called Kent College. And down in the valley where this wonderful cathedral is, where Thomas à Becket was murdered in, I don't know, whatever it was, I forget the year, there's a school called King's School Canterbury, which is a truly marvelous school. But it was originally the Abbey School of St. Augustine's Abbey, dating back to 597. And that's the oldest extant school giving a superb education in the world.
Wow.
Now, if you go to that school, you learn Latin, you learn Greek, you learn logic, you learn rhetoric, and all those other kind of good things. Fast forward to the present, you learn how to adopt new technology and maintain the British Empire, even though a lot of people think the empire's finished, and I would argue it's never been stronger. Over to you.
Now, so David, you've raised another point that I think is confusing for a lot of people, this concept of the City of London, because until I started talking with you and having these conversations that you and I have each week on the show, I just thought the City of London was, you know, Big Ben and Waterloo Station and all the places I've been to in London, but you're actually talking about this square mile that is its own extraterritorial. What is it about the City of London that you're talking about that differs from most people's expectations?
Well, I think Greater London proper has, 9 or 10 million population. The square mile is predominant. It's got a few residents, right? But most people commute into the square mile and for work. My grandfather was in the running to be the Lord Mayor of the City of London. He never made it, but he founded, I believe, the Motor Union Insurance Company. So it's very likely, I have to dig back into the annals of our history, but it's highly likely he was a member of the Worshipful Company of Insurers, if it had been founded then. And so when the Queen goes in, she has to ask permission, as I understand it, from the City of London Mayor. And I don't know if you've heard of Dick Whittington, but he was a mayor of the City of London. And I believe the current mayor is the 780th mayor. There's one elected every year. And interestingly, the people who can elect the mayor and the aldermen of the City of London are the people who work there and have employment there. So it's not a true democracy. It's really a system that's run by very, very powerful groups of people, often embedded in a livery company with 700 years of history. And because you are so brilliant at your collages, it strikes me as amusing that when we send a message, a pictorial message by your collages with some words that you and I discussed, the earliest patent, as I understand it, granted in England was a patent for stained glass manufacture. And I don't know if you've ever been in those wonderful medieval cathedrals, but the stained glass windows depict good and bad, you know, serpents chasing around and so on, because that was the period with the illiterate peasants. And with the way in which they've destroyed the education system in the Five Eyes countries, I think it's gone full cycle, because whilst most young people going to university are literate, they have totally lost the art of a deductive and a scientific analysis. And I'd like, and I believe that you and I can help bring that back by showing people how they can ground truth, the theories of their teachers, such as catastrophic anthropogenic global warming. And what I would like to do, and I'd be quite happy to go back to my alma mater and abuse them vigorously, because I was in the mechanical sciences course at Cambridge. And I looked the other day, because I got a friend in England who lives near Oxford, and I said, are there any students or any faculty at Oxford University that have the slightest interest in discovering how the Twin Towers came down in their same footprint under gravity on the same day from a point of view of explosives or demolition? He said, there's no one here. The University of Oxford has moved on.
Wow.
Right? So I looked up Cambridge, right, which has got some formidable engineers with a great history. I think I was pretty smart one. I did my 3-year engineering course in 2 years. Mr. Marsden, I think he's still puzzled by what kind of a degree I have. So by the end of year 2, my college, Queen's College, awarded me a $50 or an $80 pound scholarship in my getting a first class honors in mechanical sciences tripos. But I digress. The point is, with all those brilliant minds going to Cambridge and many other universities around in the engineering department, none of them is either interested or capable in reverse engineering the greatest crime perhaps in the history of the world, because you had a sovereign country with high value targets taken out by an insider group that was a network, in my opinion, of evil teachers linked through fiber optics around the world. Over to you.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing to me when people are unwilling to ask questions about these unsolved murders, unsolved crimes, massive international events. These are the questions that you and I are asking each week on our show, and I hope that people will join us on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards, and also on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. It's really important that people sponsor David on Patreon, because we couldn't do these shows without David. It's become really an amazing collaborative effort, and he and I spend quite a lot of time discussing the content, putting together these collages, and of course I hope that people will sponsor Crowdsource the Truth by going to patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. So, David, the collages have become more complex for sure, and there are some other things in it this week that maybe require some explaining. We've got Maureen Baginski, we've got Chris Hyman, who we've seen before, who's now in the gift box. Maureen Baginski, of course, famously said that 9/11 was a gift to the NSA. That is one of the most insensitive and psychotic things a government employee could possibly say. But we've got this new guy here who we have not shown before. Who is this, and what is he doing here?
Oh, this is very interesting. This is Roy Gardner. Essentially, I'm saying those people that are popping out of the gift box, and on the side of the gift box is the heraldry, if that's the right term, for the Worshipful Company of World Traders. And what I'm suggesting is the Worshipful Company of World Traders is a livery company in the city of London that I think became a guild on the 24th of May of 2001, so just a few months before the 9/11 attack, when I would suggest the principal competitor to the Worshipful Company of World Traders would be destroyed, as an interloper. Anyway, inside that box, you have Maureen Baginski, who was 25 years with the NSA, reaching a very senior position in terms of cyberspace and signals intelligence. She left the NSA, and then from 2003 to 2005, she was responsible for installing the first, now people have to ask me or ask any of themselves, is this possible, to install the first intelligence network in the FBI. And I'm saying, well, what's the FBI been doing since it was formed that means that this woman comes along, and from 2003 to 2005, she installs an intelligence network? And then my question is, did she install an intelligence network that supports this split tunneling approach,
Right,
where you take timestamp data that would normally be required by the FBI to solve a crime, and you route that to a white list of teachers who are interested in betting on body counts and the times of death of their high-value enemies? So the FBI is left with data, crime scene data, if you will, where the chain of custody has been broken, and I think Mr. Swigart knows all about that. And what's left after the FBI have picked over the data and the evil teachers have picked over the data is given to social engineers such as Kinetic North America, whose privatization from the Ministry of Defense was, I believe, handled by N.M. Rothschild through Wilbur Ross. And what Kinetic North America has, it's got a patent for social engineering protection appliance, which looks at interactions such as yours and mine and other people's on the internet and determines whether they are deemed to be malicious or criminal, and basically sideswipes them. So we end up with our site being serving as a decoy for cranks or whatever it is, while the really intelligent people are plagued and buried in a morass of bureaucratic red tape or these fake lawsuits, which is tying you down.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree with you, David. And I think for a lot of people, when they hear the type of statements that you're making, they may find them initially difficult to accept. But, I mean, the death pool betting, this is something that is quite outrageous. But when we consider, for instance, you're talking about the evil teachers, and of course, among them, perhaps one of the most important is Hillary Clinton. She was teaching where? University of Arkansas or something like that. And I'm sure...
With a boyfriend, with a husband. Mm.
Sorry, what's that?
Yeah, Bill and Hillary Clinton taught at the University of Arkansas, I believe.
Right. And so if we're talking about this whitelisted group receiving information that would allow them to get involved in, pool betting, I think it's not that difficult for people to recall when Hillary Clinton was talking about Gaddafi.
So, I mean, that is the land
she said
of
this.
Unconfirmed.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
So here she is laughing about the brutal murder of a guy who was running a country that was, an organized country, not declaring war on anybody. The people generally really liked Gaddafi, and she's laughing that he's dead. Over 1 million people died in Libya, and she's laughing about that. So I think people watching us right now should ask themselves, is this the type of person who would potentially bet on when and how Gaddafi might die? How many anal intrusions of a bayonet would he accept before he died? There's a million different ways that bets could be placed on a variety of different parameters. And what you're suggesting is that based on the history of White's Gambling Club in London, it's known, it's recorded that they would bet on all sorts of intricate little parameters of various members of various armies dying in certain ways. So this isn't something that you've made up. This is historical information that you're referencing. So I think that's very important for people to keep in mind, and they can go back, David, and watch all of our previous shows. They're easily found on patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. So if anybody's watching us right now on YouTube or Facebook or Periscope and finds the things that you're saying outlandish or difficult to understand or believe, they should go back and review some of the previous videos and the history that you've based these hypotheses on.
Yeah, and if I may, I'd like to say, when people are thinking about transitioning from, let's say, the free service into the Patreon only, what I'd like to say is that in the next hour of our discussion, which is Patreon only, I'd like to take people through the development of what I believe was a dead pool, where people bet on the body counts and times of death of the nearly 3,000 people in the Twin Towers. And that would take us along a timeline, I believe, that would connect the Hawkhills resilience training exercise and quite possibly a command center deep below that facility, where people could actually stage the body counts and the times of death using fiber optic links that at one end connect to the cesium fountain clock, which would give you precise times to within a millisecond, and at the other end run into the World Trade Center complex on dark fiber that can be rented on a pay-to-pay basis by people who want to take the dark fiber and turn it into dirty fiber. And by dirty fiber, I've coined that phrase, I'm rather proud of it, it actually is designed to conceal a crime where there's 3 groups of communities that are served by the dirty fiber. One is the white list of teachers that can then bet on body counts and times of death of people who choose to be, not even choose to be, but are seen as their enemies. The FBI, under, let's say, Maureen Baginski and SERCO, who are now deprived of the data timestamps, so they can't reconstruct the crime. And then the social engineers, where I would invite, and not plead, that's the wrong word, but I'd love to think that the people who support us can understand a big challenge we face is there is a network of what are known at the Electronic Visualization Laboratory as magic living objects, right?
Right.
Or AI wizard. And they
Again,
are shutting
their
us
term.
down, right?
Yeah.
Now, let me just,
Sure.
okay. All right. Sorry about that interruption.
No problem. But it's important, David, to also reiterate that these terms are not terms that you and I are coming up with and introducing into the conversation. Evil teachers, that comes from the University of Illinois in Chicago Electronic Visualization Lab. MALO is magical. What does it normally stand for in the university?
Magic living object. And the interesting thing about the L, it could be magic lying object. And I think they've infested the internet of things, if you will, with magic lying objects that are going around and maligning, diminishing, libeling, or slandering people like you and me and other legitimate investigators. So that the population now is sort of cowed into the willing suspension of disbelief, if you will, right? Where they cannot see now or distinguish between a wizard and a legitimate investigator. Over to you.
Right, and as I was saying, all this stuff comes from the Electronic Visualization Laboratory at the University of Illinois in Chicago. This MALO drama was developed by Samrong Thongrong, which, yeah, I agree, that sounds like a Thai name. There's a very kind of rhythmic, rhyming sound to the Thai language. And we've borrowed, I should say, some of the imagery. We've been inspired by this MALO drama, which is dealing with time. It shows a metronome. It shows this kind of bizarre head sitting there. And of course, it shows the Salvador Dali persistence of memory melting clock in another image for it. So we've sort of borrowed those images and included them on the wizard's table here in our latest iterations of the collage. And so David, we have just about 10 or 15 minutes more before we transition over to our exclusive subscriber-only show, which will carry on patreon.com/ Reverse CSI Storyboards and patreon.com/ crowdsource the truth, as well as subscribestar.com/ crowdsource the truth. And we'll get into some more detail there. But, MALO, as you've pointed out, it means bad in Spanish, mal. And it's interesting that the University of Illinois Chicago is selecting all these names for their programs. I mean, they're not calling it the polite bunny room, it's the evil bat cave.
Evil cat cave with AI wizards,
yeah,
propagated through magic lying objects around
right.
the world, where basically I think it's hard now to go through post-secondary education and come out with anything of value, because I was blessed, back in the 1960s, I don't think there was any political interference in the mechanical engineering course at Cambridge University. I had wonderful teachers, and I have a great memory of some of the things they told me. Like there are three, as an industrial manager potential, there are three ideologies you're going to have to contend with, and one is more dangerous than the other two. And it turns out that in the professor's opinion, that bureaucracy was more dangerous than capitalism or communism. And of course, the classic example of that would be Christine Marcy, Phil McConnell's sister, who I believe was probably helped to conceive a Mendenhall's baby, and that's another story.
Yeah.
Back in August, the conception probably took place in June or August, perhaps, of 1978, when one Nicholas Soames, the guy shown with the paper in his hand, was in the United States, in Washington, as personal assistant to Senator Mark Hatfield, the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, which I understand is the most powerful committee in the United States Senate. And he would have been available to service the Mendenhall victim, right? So, I mean, I think it's a fascinating concept. And in the collage, he's shown looking sort of askance at his brother, Rupert Soames, who is the chief executive officer of SERCO, having taken over from Chris Hyman. And coming out of that gift box, if we could sort of leave on that note, we have these three individuals, and I'll remind listeners, we have Christopher Hyman, the chief executive officer of SERCO, who resigned because of the prisoner escort scandal. But on 9/11, he was in the windows of the World Restaurant, way up on the North Tower, at a breakfast meeting for the Risk Waters Group, which is a publishing insurance group out of London. And he got up from the breakfast meeting around 8:30, and he went down to the 47th floor to a shareholders meeting of SERCO, hosted potentially by Wilbur Ross, because Wilbur Ross or N.M. Rothschild is the investment banker for SERCO. Then we have Maureen Baginski, who thought it was prudent to talk, well, I think prudent is not the right word, to her colleagues at the National Security Agency after 9/11, where she said that 9/11 was a gift to the NSA because now we can get all the money we want. She is now the Vice President of Intelligence Services for SERCO. And then we have Roy Gardner, who sold the Standard Telephone and Communications outfit to Nortel, I think in 1991. But Standard Telephone and Communications was the inventor group for pulse code modulation and fiber optics. So on 9/11, Mr. Gardner, I believe, would have understood perfectly the benefit or the power or the potential of running fiber optic cables into the World Trade Center campus, because there would be very little chance of electromagnetic crosstalk that might have set the detonators or the igniters off. And actually, it's highly likely that the remote demolition, controlled demolition of the World Trade Centers in New York was run from the Hawkhills command bunker down below in Yorkshire in England. Over to you.
Well, David, you've just said something very interesting. You talked about the Risk Waters Group, and you've mentioned them many times, but you've just stated it in such a way that caused me to think of something. So you said it's a publishing and insurance group. I understand that Risk Waters Group publishes some sort of periodical for the insurance industry. Is that correct?
Correct.
So searching
They lost
for
everyone.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, searching for Risk Waters Group brings me to this risk.net, which I guess may be a publication of theirs as well. But you've spoken to us about the Worshipful Company of Insurers. They're in the same building in London as the Worshipful Company of Firefighters. What about the Worshipful Company of Newspapermen? Because it seems if you're dealing with newspapers for the insurance industry, you'd be hooked up with both of those things.
Well, that's right. So that City and Guilds organization, in its modern form, it was started in 1870, right, with about 16 livery companies. And then after, I think, the Honorable Company of Air Pilots and Air Navigators was formed in 1929, which is when RCAGB was formed. RCAGB would become SERCO. Then there was a series of modern livery companies that I think represent the British invisibles, like the bankers and insurers and traders and that sort of thing. And that group, I believe, employed Barack Hussein Obama. Sorry, apologies to Osama bin Laden. That employed Barack Hussein Obama in 1984 at an outfit in New York called BIC. And apparently the theory was that was Business International Corporation. But I think BIC actually stood for British Invisibles Corporation, which are the livery companies that don't have a trade in a tangible object. I think they employed him. And the interesting thing, and Americans should understand that, because I'm very interested in tracking task, talent, and time. That is to say, if you don't have the talent in an organization it's not going to be very effective at delivering whatever it was set up to do. So Barack Hussein Obama, right, was employed, as I understand it, by BIC to write and study on leverage leases and currency swaps. Isn't that interesting that there was the leverage lease tower 6 weeks before they were demolished by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, which incidentally I believe was modeled on the Port of London. But the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey outsourced the 99-year mortgage to Larry Silverstein, who used a leverage lease to acquire it. And the leverage lease was put together by Wells Fargo at $3.2 billion. Wells Fargo had a whole family of sub-investors in the conglomerate or whatever it was that took over. And it appears then they adjusted the Willis-Faber insurance note for the towers such that it would pay out if both towers came down in the same day.
David, sorry for interrupting, but we should also point out that Wells Fargo just turned over President Donald Trump's financial records to Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats who insist that they should get to see them. Trump hasn't been actually formally accused of a crime. They're just asking for his bank records. That's unbelievable. I mean, they're basically letting us know that Congress or the government or whoever can come and take your personal and private information for any reason that they choose whatsoever. And just one other thing I want to raise in the last couple of minutes that we have here, I was looking as you were speaking for this Business International Corporation, which when you look up BIC New York, it first brings you to this Business Integrity Commission. That seems to, there's the Bahia International Community. There's all kinds of things.
If you Google BIC and Obama, you'll find a Wikipedia entry.
Yes.
And
well, I just put in Business International Corporation, and that got us to it. And of course, Barack Obama comes up right away. The point I was getting at is there seems to be a trend where, when I've named various companies, one of the things that I'm trying to do is come up with a name that will not be confused with some other company. But it's interesting that some of these companies are trying to do the opposite. For instance, you mentioned a company that employed David Swigert in the past called Eurosign. As I recall, it was actually called Eurosign Card. And when I look for that, we're getting a lot of returns about the symbol for the euro sign. So it just makes it a little bit more difficult to find. It seems like people are using these names that make searching for things very difficult. When we talk about our friend, the wizard, Mr. Swigert, his name is David George Swigert. His brother's name is George Swigert. That in of itself is pretty confusing. We've got SERCO Group, and then we've got the other SERCO, that's SERCO North America or SERCO USA. These things are all seemingly designed to intentionally confuse. Perhaps that's wizard's work, David.
Well, and that comes back to, I think, the need for our loyal listeners to understand we need their help. I mean, I think they're very sharp, but it's not just us, touting an idea against someone who's not listening. I think there is an active element on that Kinetic North America, which has been programmed through artificial intelligence to intercept emails and communications between people like you and me, and then shepherd it off down one of these tunnels and activate a group of social engineers or AI wizards, or how shall I put it, a magic living object, right, to actually siphon off interest so that our site that used to have what I would call a lot of